Premiers met virtually with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today to discuss a response to President Donald Trump's tariff threats, which he says could come into effect on February 1st.
I certainly support the federal government's retaliation plan as part of the Team Canada approach.
We have to make sure that we match these tariffs dollar for dollar. We need to target where it's going to impact Americans the most.
The broad-based counter tariffs are escalating. The entire conversation around tariffs will be hurtful to Canadians and will be hurtful to the entirety of North Americans.
We study all kinds of scenarios, all kinds of retaliation measures, but it's too soon to say, okay, that's what I'll do.
Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey joins me now. Premier, good to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, David, how are you?
I'm well, sir. I'm a little bit confused as to what Donald Trump intends to do. I don't know if you have any better clarity after your meeting with the other First Ministers, because it seems to change and shift. What is your understanding of where things are on this issue?
Look, the only thing certain is the uncertainty. You've heard me say before, the president likes to operate in an environment of chaos, and I believe that this current situation that we find ourselves in as Canadians is no different. He has said April 1st, and then he said February 1st. Which one is true? Who knows? By the way, he did say Mexico was going to build a wall and Mexico was going to pay for it. He says all kinds of things that some come to fruition and some don't. But rest assured, all of those statements he makes are to cause a chaotic environment. Oftentimes, I believe he doesn't even know what value he's going to extract from that environment or that ecosystem of chaos, but he knows he's going to extract something. And I think that that's where we find ourselves now. What I will say is that the unified Team Canada approach that was evident today on the First Minister's call is the right approach. It has to be strategic, it has to be well thought out, it has to be reactive and responsive, but responsible. And I think that that's what Canadians can be assured of from a coast-to-coast-to-coast approach.
Okay, you say it was a unified Team Canada approach at the First Minister's call today. Wasn't quite the case at the First Minister's meeting last week. Have things changed with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, or is she still an outlier on her argument that the federal response has to be limited in a way that doesn't affect her oil sector?
Look, I think it's important to have these discussions. You can appreciate, David, as a Newfoundlander and Labradorian, the importance of oil and gas to our province. I can understand Premier Smith's position, certainly from an economic perspective, certainly from a jobs perspective, and from the Treasury's view of Newfoundland and Labrador. That said, the arena for that discussion, the arena for where energy fits in this strategy belongs behind closed doors. The last thing we want or need is to show a disconnected, disjointed approach. There's a reason why people employ the divide and conquer technique all the time, because it works. And we need to make sure that we have a unified front. And I can tell you on that call earlier today, there was more of a unified approach, a unified voice than perhaps there may have seemed to be in the media last week.
Well, I mean, the meeting last week led to a series of tweets from Premier Smith comparing, a retaliation to Trump to the National Energy Program of the first Trudeau prime ministership, which is a policy instituted willingly by the central government as opposed to a retaliatory option. I mean, what is so different now? Is it just the way things have evolved with Trump over the last 48 hours, or was it the pushback and reaction to how things rolled out?
Well, I think we've been given a reprieve, whether that's a week or 6 weeks. So there is a time for cooler heads to prevail. There's time for a more Canadian diplomatic approach to be employed. And I give Premier Smith full credit. She's down there exercising her influence and gathering data points and information and intel that will help drive the ultimate strategy. Full credit to her. I was there myself yesterday. But I do believe firmly that the president often conflates issues, and we can't lose sight of the national unity nor the national identity in this current moment in history. I can appreciate the acuity of the fiscal situation. Everyone understands the severity of the potential economic repercussions, but we can't lose sight of the overall unity and identity of Canadians.
Right. Look, Alberta is acutely vulnerable to these tariffs, right? About 25, 26% of its industry is exposed. About 13% of its workforce could be eliminated if it happens. You've got about a fifth of your economy exposed to this with oil and fish exports and things. So everybody has risk here. But do you think the message will be more coherent going forward after this, or do you still think you might have a little bit of that outlier from Danielle Smith?
Well, you'll have to ask her about whether or not she wants to continue to be an outlier. I think we need to put the country first.
Right.
I think we need to be part of a Team Canada. When you take out different industries, not only do you pit region against region, you pit industry against industry within your region. So for me, for example, the last thing that I want to see is oil and gas workers fighting with crab fishermen and harvesters or plant workers. Because at the local level, that's really what we're saying. We're really saying that one industry is above others. And a job is a job is a job, and it's an important job within and across and between industries in Newfoundland and Labrador as it is throughout the country.
So you attended the inauguration not as part of the formal program with the president, but at the Canada Embassy and with others there. Right. Did you get to meet with U.S. lawmakers, anyone in Trump's orbit, business groups that you could make the Canadian argument to?
Absolutely. We met with, for example, Newt Gingrich. He happened to be at the embassy. I spent some time talking with him, and obviously he's in the Trump sphere, if you will. And he made it quite clear that the president actually believes in tariffs. This isn't a threat, that he believes that tariffs are a source of revenue generation for the Treasury of the United States. And he had some advice with respect to how Canadians should respond to that. But I was always unsure whether the president, given the people surrounding him and given, of course, the integration of our economy, if he truly believed that tariffs from Canada were a revenue generator for the United States. It certainly seems like that. Seems like he does believe that fact. Now we have some time to allow our trade officials, our political leaders, our industrial leaders to convince the sphere of influence around the president that when it comes to Canada, that is actually not the case. I mean, I've seen it on your show before. 60 billion potential trade deficit on a multi-trillion-dollar economy is really inconsequential. But in addition to that, if you take out energy, the U.S. is in a trade surplus with Canada. So, we have to continue telling this story from a macroeconomic perspective to the decision makers in the United States. But we also have to make sure that American citizens, half of my family are American. My wife is from Oregon. My daughter is born in Baltimore, Maryland. They need to understand that these tariffs will have a 25% impact on them. It's not really just a tariff, it's a Trump tax on families' expenses during this time of high cost of living in the United States, which he's promised to fix, by the way.
But that's an important insight you got there from former Speaker Gingrich, or Newt Gingrich. I can't remember his precise role in Congress. I believe he might have been the Speaker of the House.
Speaker of the House.
Right, yeah. So, but if they truly see this as a revenue generator, and as a way also, a second component of that is to repatriate manufacturing inside the U.S. borders, because the tariff becomes too expensive for a factory or the auto sector, for example, to operate in Ontario, that becomes a more difficult negotiation than just a demand to tighten things up at the border because of flows. That is a fundamental restructuring of the economic relationship that he is seeking, as misguided as you may believe it to be.
Absolutely, and that's the main concern. I do think as a consequence of that position and of that premise, we need to be steadfast and firm in our position of strength. Because, as you know, he's concerned about trade deficits all over the world. And while we have a bilateral approach going right now, certainly he's concerned with trade deficits that exist around the globe. We need to make sure that he fully understands that the integration of a resource economy and manufacturing economy actually the net positive is to him.
Right.
It's not to us. We have resources here in Newfoundland and Labrador, critical minerals, raw seafood, lumber, all of which gets taken to the United States, and secondary processing and manufacturing occur in the United States. If there begins to be tariffs placed on some of those fundamental raw resources, it is going to have downstream impact on his economy. And David, you and I have talked about this before. President Hoover tried this very tool with the exact same premise, and it made the Great Depression worse, not better.
Okay, I have one last question before I let you go, Premier. Doug Ford is getting ready for an early election. I got a lot of people.
Wish him the best of luck.
I got a lot of people back home calling me and saying, I think Andrew Furey is getting ready for an early election because you're not due to go till October of this year. Are you getting ready to have a spring-winter election in Newfoundland and Labrador?
Look, I'll tell you what I've told all the local media and continue to tell everybody. I'm focused on working on behalf of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, but that said, there will be an election in 2025.
Okay, that's not a no, though, right? I just want to highlight that before I let you go.
Well, you said from spring to winter. That takes up the whole.
Well, we're in winter.
year.
No, we're in winter now, and spring is coming. So are you looking at the first quarter of this year, first half of this year?
There will be an election in 2025, David. You can rest assured.
Okay, Premier Andrew Furey. Until we speak again, thank you, sir.
Take care, man.
Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communication strategist, and here in our Ottawa studio, we've got Jordan Leiknitz. She is a former NDP strategist. Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties, and Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of the Hill Times. Good to see you all. Tim, I'll start with you. The premiers all think there needs to be a response, but while they support dollar for dollar in principle, I think there's a reality of how many dollars for dollars they're willing and able to go.
What sector, what region?
But $600 billion of U.S. goods is just $600 billion. That's a bit too much.
Look, I think better today than last week, seeing more unity of purpose. I think they also have to fire up, as they have been, a few different trial balloons, as Trump is doing, although I think Trump fires up blimps in the air, the rest fire up balloons. The premiers need to look like they're ready, as does the government. But we're in this weird game, as we usually are when Donald Trump is in office. Is it February 1st? Is it April 1st?
Yes.
But being ready is an essential. And I think there seems to be broad public support, at least in the early days, from some of the data that I'm seeing, for retaliation. It's just you don't retaliate till you have something to retaliate about. So we sit and we wait.
Yeah, Jordan, it's hard to have clarity on the response or the reaction when there hasn't been an action yet. And they need to kind of hold it together while Trump keeps changing the rules of the game on the fly here.
Well, that's right. And it's just, this is the chaos factor that comes with Trump. It's that, sure, this week he said it'll be such and such date and such amount, but, we also know that that could change, right? So I think that it's important, the posturing that they're doing in terms of a strong position. Also letting it be known that, as Tim said, there is broad public support for retaliatory tariffs. That projecting that strength and that willingness to go there, I think, is going to be really important to strengthening the hand of the government when we actually eventually see the details here. But yeah, we're in a bit of a strange waiting room right now, so I think it makes sense that we're seeing more discussion about things that, while they're important, are probably not going to solve the problem. We can have all the internal trade we want, and we can do all the Buy Canadian we want. It's not going to replace what we would lose in our trade with the U.S. But this is also a way of showing a diversity of tools and sort of bringing Canadians along as we wait, basically.
Look, diversifying Canada's economic options and reducing internal trade barriers are all things Canada should do for the long term for its own purposes.
And all things we talked about doing during the last Trump presidency as well,
yes.
and the last renegotiation, and that we didn't really
Premiers keep talking about internal trade barriers and not really doing much about
That's
it,
right.
right? It's an interesting thing. But, Sherelle, it's Trump said in his statement threatening the tariffs, it's about the border and fentanyl and migrant trafficking. The Wall Street Journal says it's about forcing an earlier renegotiation of NAFTA, which Trump denies. Some people in Canada are saying, it's because he wants us to hit that 2% defense spending. I talked to Andrew Furey earlier, the Premier, who spoke with Newt Gingrich on Inauguration Day, and Gingrich said to him, look, he just sees tariffs as a revenue source. This is his plan to raise money. This is the plan to get manufacturing to move back inside the U.S. We don't really know the motivation, but that last one is a fundamental restructuring of the relationship and a harder objective to argue against.
Well, I think almost anything that Donald Trump puts forward is kind of hard to argue against because it isn't always rooted in logic and facts and reason.
Right.
So yes, absolutely. I think and forgive me if I'm sounding a bit like a broken record, over the weeks that it's always for Donald Trump about the win. So yes, he said that it was about the border. Yes, he said it. And everybody started tearing their hair out to say, yo, our border's broken, and our border's not broken, or we have to do this and that. It was never about that. It's what can Donald Trump do to win? He wanted the win. He wanted to see everybody, running around like chickens with their heads cut off, and they did. What we have today, yes, we do have some, I think, important steps that were made because, yes, absolutely, there were things that this country can and should do for itself. There was a drug bust today there was a cocaine that was coming over from the U.S. border into Canada. So there are things that we can do as a country to step up. But I don't know if I completely agree that we were seeing more unity among the premiers. I found that you had hearings from, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, taking more of Danielle Smith's side about, talking against export tariffs, talking against the dollar for dollar retaliation. I feel like now that we have that little bit of a gap, it wasn't quite as imminent as, day one, January 20th. People are now kind of realigning themselves and saying, okay, hang on, we've got a little room here. How can I reposition myself?
Yeah, there's probably a little bit of hyperbole in the initial response. Like when Daniel Smith was immediately comparing this with the National Energy Program of the Pierre Elliott Trudeau government, I mean, that was a conscious choice, right? What we're talking about here is response to sort of an unprecedented trade action by your biggest partner. So, Amanda, in terms of where things are today, they're kind of not yelling at each other, and taking shots at each other. But, Doug Ford is off to his election and Daniel Smith is still in the States. So do you think things have fundamentally changed, or is it just sort of in abeyance because Trump has kind of put things in abeyance?
Yeah, I do. And I think that we've seen sort of a repositioning, as Sherelle has said, and we've seen a diversifying of what tools will be in the toolkit. And I thought today we also saw a different kind of repositioning and diversifying, and that was around message. So the Prime Minister trying on something new, which was, we can help you achieve your golden age. We are the safe, reliable partner in an uncertain world, was the words that he used. And then he talked about what could the alternative be? Getting your resources from China and Russia and Venezuela. And I thought that was an interesting communications tact, because you can either talk about all of the retaliatory measures and you can sort of ramp up the rhetoric and you can take that strong position, but then you're just really in, this back and forth with Trump or whatever Trump may be thinking at any given time. But to actually repeat back some of the things that Trump wants to do and to be seen as an ally or somebody who helps you get there to the golden age, I thought was an interesting tactic. And when you have more time, you can play some of these communications games as well, right? You can try some things on and you can do more of the charm offensive on media, and you can deploy people in different areas, whether it's through officials or it's through, provincial leaders talking to their state counterparts. But time gives us a little bit of that elasticity. And I thought it was sort of a smart tact coming out of today's meeting.
Except the challenge, sorry, I was going to say just on Amanda's point, the challenge to Governor Trudeau's comments, as the president calls him, is that, right? He is diminished in the eyes of the president because he's going. I agree that the message was useful and constructive, but the challenge still is the messenger. And while that messenger is there, he can say whatever is wonderful and whatever is constructive, but it's not going to get heard because Trump has already dismissed the prime minister. Perhaps others will pick it up, but the way things are going in the Liberal leadership race and across the country, Justin Trudeau says one thing, they're all doing the other thing. So maybe it's all getting wasted, and that's the prime minister's own fault in many circumstances, given the way people are feeling about him at the moment. But I'm not sure that Donald Trump yet is prepared to embrace the constructive. He appears to enjoy the disruptive and is enjoying it with great relish in his early days back in office.
Yeah, I wonder, I don't know if whoever is prime minister is going to matter. with Trump.
Yeah.
Or like Doug Ford saying, Rob Benzie has this in the Star today. He gave a speech that we need the strongest mandate ever in this early election to send a message to Donald Trump that Ontarians won't take it. Donald Trump doesn't care.
Yeah,
right? Like you need to convince every Republican in the United States so they can convince Donald Trump.
I
right?
Donald Trump is not looking at your popular vote number about whether he's going to take you seriously. Now, that said, I do think that, it may be a rude surprise for Pierre Poilievre, should he win government, that Trump will not treat him deferentially just because he took Trudeau's place. I do think that actually somebody like Doug Ford could potentially have more success with Trump, but that's more on like a personality basis than it would be because he's from a particular party or because he has a particular sort of vote share. And, and I think what we're seeing very clearly in Ontario right now is Doug Ford taking an opportunity. He wanted to go to an early election anyway. Now this is the reason, but that's being made to fit the political necessity. They really want to get this election out of the way before Poilievre is elected federally and becomes unpopular, basically.
Yeah, but Cheryl, look, having a stable government, having a prime minister with a clear mandate, all very important. No question about it. But that's kind of rational political analysis, and I don't know if that applies when dealing with Donald Trump, right? Like David McNaughton was on the show on Inauguration Day. He was the ambassador first time around. Is like, Trump needs a win. Find something to give him a win on. This is the transactional thing. But the people who he's going to listen to are the people in his orbit. You need to convince them. And it feels like that's where they need to make the arguments. And I don't know if it matters if it's Pierre Poilievre or Justin Trudeau or Doug Ford or Scott Moe or Daniel Smith at this point in time.
Yeah, everybody seems to be trying to do that. Everybody's trying to knock on those doors and speak to those people, which is good. But we also aren't dealing with the same Donald Trump and the same Donald Trump administration and inner circle as we were, 4 years ago or 8 years ago. So the people around him have coalesced to be much more, I think, deferential to him, much more, aligned with his brand of chaos. So yes, you can make the arguments to those people, but even they are saying, yeah, but ultimately it's up to him.
Exactly. And that's the thing, right? And Amanda, on that, one of his first acts was to pardon 1,500 people who violently stormed the Capitol, beat police officers, some of whom killed themselves in the weeks after this, because they were on his side. So, I don't even know how you begin to approach. It's clear the tariffs are going to do damage and cost everybody money and all of these things. But if he thinks this is the way to generate revenue, and he's set on doing his thing for his people, it's a tough argument to make, no matter what the response includes from Canada.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's been, it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole. Something comes up and we have to respond. And how are we going to respond? We're going to take the widest possible net. We're going to cast the widest possible net and respond in as many ways as possible. And I think what we learned, having seen January 20th come and go, is that this deadline is fluid. So if we're going to have a national response every time he says something in an offhanded way, we're going to just be in constant response mode. And we can't possibly do that. So, and also at some point it becomes a little bit concerning and tiring for the Canadian population who's like, do we have a connection point? Do we have a plan? So I think that, coming out of today, what is important is that they're talking and reassuring Canadians that, yes, a plan is in place, that they've considered every tool in the toolbox, that they'll take retaliatory measures if necessary, but that we also have to wait until there's something concrete. And in the meantime, the people who are able to have meetings with those who are in decision-making chairs or who are disproportionately affected because their states do more trade with us, those conversations are happening. But if we're constantly in this mess where we're responding to every offhanded, tweet or comment that Trump makes, we're in a spiral. And there's no possible way that we can keep that up at the pace in which we've been going.
No, look, that's a very good point. But I tell you, you look at what he's done with the executive orders and sending troops, he is moving fast, much faster than he did in his first term. And it's day 3, 1,458 to go.